Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, the code is RPG City, and it's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through Saturday, July 31st. You heard that right, folks. There's plenty of time to cash in this code, RPG City, at Noble Knight Games for 10% off orders of $10 or more, because this promo is running until July 31st. Never been a better time to get back to gaming with your friends. New games, old games, whatever you're looking for, Noble Knight has it, and they're ready to part with it and add it to your collection. So don't forget, when you're checking out at Noble Knight Games, online or in person, RPG City is the code for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through Saturday, July 31st, from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. Planet X Games is back with a new spin on an old favorite. Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is coming to Kickstarter Tuesday, May 25th, now compatible for the Dungeon Crawl Classics rule set. The Dungeon Crawl Classics compatible version of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is designed for a group of 4 to 6 third-level characters and can be used for campaign play and as a one-shot non-competitive module, but also works equally well as a tournament scenario. The Dungeon Crawl Classics compatible edition of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is now available for the first time in print, both as a hardcover collector's edition and as a softcover adventure scenario. Identical in tone and feel to all those classic DCC modules we've all come to know and love. So be sure to check out the DCC compatible edition of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride from Planet X Games on Kickstarter May 25th.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and today we have a very special guest. Momatoes is here to talk about her new Kickstarter, Arc Doom Tabletop RPG. It's out now. It is very exciting, and we can't wait to talk to her about it. Stu's with me as always, and without further ado, hey, Momatoes, how you doing today?
Hi, John. Thanks for asking. I'm doing really well today. It is nighttime here, but I believe morning over there. So it's always interesting having these conversations across the world. So that always makes me happy whenever this happens.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Stu and I are both up very early today. I've had my coffee, though, so I'm ready to dance. How about you, Stu?
I'm also caffeinated. Is it Monday night there?
Yes, Monday night.
Oh, you're calling us from the future. I love that.
That is pretty cool. So, Momatoes, why don't you tell our listeners about Arc, Doom Tabletop RPG?
Okay, so Arc is a tabletop RPG that puts the focus on very cataclysmic adventures with a real-time mechanic that really ups the tension. So the rules are fairly seamless so that you can focus more on confronting the doom that will happen at the end of a doomsday clock that will keep on advancing whether or not your players have anything to say about it. But they can confront it, they can stop it, and they can emerge as heroes of your adventure.
So how does the Doomsday Clock mechanic work?
So basically, at the beginning of the game, when you set it up, you decide how long the game will take, and that will determine the Doomsday Clock. So for example, if you want a single session that's just 3 hours long, that's around 9 Doomsday Clock moments. So at every half hour, you advance 1 moment in that Doomsday Clock. And it reaches the end, that means that something really bad is going to happen.
Now, is this something that you came up with because by and large, most players are kind of chicken shit about doing anything in an RPG? And they spend a lot of time going, I don't know. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And it's like, someone do something. Is that what that spun out of?
I've been in those kinds of situations, and I find it really worse in heist RPG. So it's like we have to plan this heist, guys, but then it's like 1 hour of failure to plan. But in reality, I wrote it for the players so that they feel really motivated to keep acting on the world around them. And also for the GM, because one issue that I challenged when I was trying to run my own games was that pacing a game was really difficult when you don't have a structure around the adventure. So putting a timer around that makes it easier for the GM to think, oh, I should ramp up the danger and tension because the doomsday clock is coming to its end.
Yeah, and I mean, for a person who's run a lot of games, that is something for me where you always want to try to increase the excitement level for your players. You always want to try to increase the things that build up to the hero moment where everyone gets the chance to potentially shine or fight the big bad or do the thing, whatever the thing is, the MacGuffin of it all. And it's hard to try to consistently keep that pace and consistently keep your players engaged. So I love this dynamic. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it takes some of the weight off of the GM's shoulder where you know that you are leading towards this thing. So now you could worry more about kind of crafting and herding the players towards that moment. Awesome. Awesome idea.
Yeah, I was inspired by the clock mechanic in a lot of existing RPGs. Like, I see it in Blades in the Dark and a couple of other RPGs where it's a really neat visual indicator of your progress. Arc basically takes that a bit further by thinking, what if the clock exists, but it moves despite player intervention?
Yeah, the thing about Blades in the Dark that is an interesting contrast, and sort of one of the things that I found difficult about running Blades in the Dark is that I didn't know exactly when to advance the clock. Like, it's sort of a nebulous thing. And I really like the fact that like there's just this inexorable march of time in Arc, like, because then I don't have to worry about it. It's not my problem. Like, it's already been established, the pace of the thing, you know?
Yeah. A lot of people have been really excited about it. And one thing that they also have noted is, aside from the blend of real time with in story time, has been the blend of real player skills with the character skills themselves. So there's kind of like the mechanics, but there's also some interaction with the play experience that I feel make it quite unique and quite rewarding for a lot of gamers, even though they're not experienced in running or playing RPGs.
And that's one of the things I think definitely drew me to this. As I'm reading the description, there is a line that says rules light, tension heavy. What does that mean for the players and the GM?
So for rules like tension heavy, it really means that a lot of the structure, a lot of the mechanics are really about empowering you to act, make skill checks, make decisions without worrying about the rules. So for example, you encounter a challenge, like you have to sneak past a troll or some guard. You can apply any different approach or solution that you want, and the rules will make a way to make that happen. So you could either do it by sneaking through, or you can do it by making a distraction. And the rules for each of those approaches are seamless enough that you don't have to look up a subsystem in chapter 3 or dig through the index for like grappling rules. But even though the rules are quite simple and easy to pick up, the doomsday mechanic, the real time, the pacing, and the eventual frenetic pace means that the tension doesn't let up.
So something that I've been thinking about a lot in writing the book about RPGs that I'm working on is that, like, the name of the thing is role-playing game, right? Which implies that you're taking the role of a character. At the same time, so many role-playing games, especially ones that embrace sort of the old school revival aesthetic, they're sort of like cleverness tests, right? For the player, which is sort of independent of the character. And I don't have any clear ideas about, I just think it's interesting that, like, the idea of role-playing games is that, oh, you get to inhabit a different character, but at the same time, it's like, but we're really testing how clever you are when you're put into weird situations. And I'm just kind of wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and or how that meshes with the interplay between like the role-playing game and the real-time mechanics of Arc.
Oh, absolutely. I played a lot of OSR games ever since a couple of years past, and I've really seen that aspect happen. Like, if you as a player cannot figure out a clever way to escape a combat, that's gonna hurt a lot on your party. And for me, I found that quite rewarding because, you know, you mentioned that it's role playing, but for many players, they also see the game part. So they like being rewarded for cleverness. I like feeling very clever and very intelligent when I think up a really cool solution that maybe my own character doesn't necessarily know about. But on the flip side, sometimes it does punish you when you don't know what to do. Like one complaint I've heard about some OSR or some other systems where player skill is important has been when trying to talk to NPCs. Because the GM will tend to say, okay, what exactly do you say to the NPC? How do you formulate your conversation or your thesis? And for a player who is new to RPGs, that feels quite overwhelming. I just want to roll my persuade check and have it over with. I
Mm.
don't want to know about Roman politics to figure out how to incite a rebellion. So so for Arc, I tried really hard to walk a fine balance between that. So the skill checks actually depend on your hero skill, which is things like physique, weaponry, artistry, but it also helps if you define an approach to go with it. So you can say, okay, I'm going to observe creatively. And if you could articulate exactly how that creative aspect will show, like, I will observe the artistic motives of this strange painting to see if it reveals clues, then your difficulty will actually be easier. So it rewards you if you think up of neat, clever solutions, but it doesn't necessarily penalize you if you just want to roll and get it over with.
So that's interesting. That sort of sounds like it comes from a narrative RPG mindset, like using keywords as mechanic.
Yeah, my boyfriend actually told me recently that reading through Arc, he felt that it was representative of Sword Dream. So that was an OSR
Yes.
movement that basically tries to blend OSR sensibilities with narrative principles that make it easy for anyone to roleplay while still enjoying that crunch that makes OSR so enjoyable.
And so Sword Dream is sort of stuff like Ultraviolet Grasslands and Nate Tremay's stuff.
Yeah, nature stuff definitely. Ultraviolet grasslands. I'll have to check in with Lucas because Lucas stuff is new always are at this point.
Okay. There's so many little gradients of the
Oh
movement.
yeah, yeah.
That's sort of something that I've also been interested in, is sort of the way that the narrative storytelling branch of RPGs and the OSR branch wouldn't necessarily be compatible. So I'm always sort of fascinated by the ways it keeps crashing into each other now that we're 20 years on, depending on which one you're looking at. I think that that's an interesting synthesis.
Oh, absolutely. But that said, there are some inherent qualities of OSR, at least the traditional parts of OSR, like harkening back to the old D&D rules, having specific ideas about classes or progressions, or wizards having a D4 HP. These don't translate or mesh so easily with narrative, but some of the core principles I feel can bleed into other kinds of movements, which is really fascinating for me as well.
So, speaking of rule sets and gameplay that is accessible for everyone, one of the things that I found in the description of this game is that you only roll when absolutely necessary, right? Because actions will come with consequences in this game, and you also have a kind of a different approach to spell casting. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that in the ARC system?
Right. So when you do mention that rolling only has to happen when it's necessary, it's also to add some weight and some stakes to that roll. Because when you do a roll just when you feel like it, that roll feels meaningless. So when you do make a roll, it has real stakes behind it. And that stakes also reflects in the overall story to the Doomsday Clock, but also with the spells and techniques. Because spells and techniques don't just recover when you take a long rest. So just because you nap doesn't mean you suddenly know again how to cast a fireball. You do have to do a bit of work for it. It's called rituals. So these are strange, unusual tasks you have to do. So you can basically attune again with Arcana, remember what it takes to cast those spells and techniques again. And some of those rituals can be quite unusual. Some of them are like burning a memento or learning somebody's secret, or my favorite has always been eating a door.
That is awesome. I love that.
That is awesome.
Nobody has yet to eat a door in the playthroughs I've had, which is slightly disappointing for me, but I'm really looking forward to the day when it happens.
Like a time bomb that you've left in the game.
Yeah.
What do you mean I have to eat a door? Well, hope you like fiber.
You don't have to do it the same day, so you could just keep snacking on it throughout the adventure.
Oh, it's like a saw trap. It's one big door, but you could eat it like toothpicks, you know? The old joke is like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Same thing.
So the art goes a long way in sort of establishing the vibe. How much input did you have into the art and what it does? Some of those animations are just rad. Did you do those animations?
Oh yeah, I'm really glad you like them. I've heard somebody ask me like, "Hey, what was the working relationship like with the artist?" And I want to answer, "Oh, it was hard because they were the worst critic, and that person was me." Since I drew the book, I laid it out, I wrote everything, so it's been like the most seamless relationship with the creator, but also the worst because I can be quite a perfectionist with how it all turns out.
As somebody who has spent an awful lot of time doing a little bit of everything because they don't trust anybody to do it the way they want it to be done, I sympathize a lot. It's I didn't realize that you did all the art. I thought I saw art credits on there. No, the art is so good. It's so rich. I can't quite put my finger on what it reminds me of, but like it hits notes that I really appreciate and look very, I would say, unique for role-playing games right now. And it doesn't remind me of anything in role-playing specifically. It's something else.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, Stu, because when I first saw the art myself, I was looking at it as that book where you think for a second it could be like a kid's book in a way, but it's deceptively super adult and super like deep and gritty. And as I, went through the Kickstarter, and I would really recommend to all our listeners to download the Quick Start rule set and get a little taste of what you have in store with ARC. It is breathtaking. This art is amazing. Everything about this Quick Start blows most people's idea of a Quick Start clearly out of the water because you're really just getting pieces of the book, or what I imagine pieces of the book to look like. So I highly recommend people download it and check it out. It's super easy to read. It's super intuitive. And the artwork is amazing. The artwork is the kind of thing where I would buy this book if it was not an RPG and just look at it. So tell your artist partner in this, they did a great job.
Thank you so much. That really does mean a lot because a lot of it are actually some of the personal pieces over the years. I guess it's funny looking back now because, oh wow, they all reflect the same kind of aesthetic, huh? And then they dovetailed in nicely with ARC's theme of adventures, but also breeding worlds that will have a big story that will happen, whether or not you wait for it or you act on it. It's something that I really want to see in a lot of art. The hint that there is a story beneath the surface. So with art that reflects mechanically in terms of like subplots and the doom that will happen regardless of what you do, and in the artwork, I really hope that it reflects that when you see it, you will sense there is a living, breathing world that doesn't wait for you to impose your own assumptions on it.
Yeah, there's nothing flat about this art. This is beautiful and dynamic, and it really does jump off the page at you. It does speak very highly of the world that it exists in. So speaking of worlds, ARC doesn't just have to be within the pages and the story of this book. It is the kind of rule set that you could really tell any kind of story with, right? It's something that the GM could say, you know what, today I want to do a heist story, or today we're doing a haunted house, or today we're going to go and do a weird Western. And you have the freedom to do that within this rule set, right?
Absolutely. And the digital content stretch goals that we have, where we have a lot of really exciting talent, game designers who will be creating unique modules for ARC, we'll be testing that out and really teasing what kind of stories would be possible with the system. So I've already seen the pitches. Some of them will deal with things like a necromancer is coming and threatening your home village, but at the same time, you came back from the dead. So what does that mean for you when you face off the necromancer? And there's also a pitch. There is God's blood throughout many diverse families. At the same time, there's hints of a divine weapon stuck in a dead divine creature that is spewing off strange miasma. So really intense stories, but at the same time, if you just want to have a comfortable Sunday game where your elves fighting for this weird ring and there's an eye in a tower, go ahead. Arc is completely yours.
That sounds so familiar. Where have I heard that story before?
So I think role-playing games in general, the stakes have always been high, right? Like the world is always kind of ending. But in recent years, I feel like the role-playing game take on the apocalypse has kind of grown a bit darker with like Merkborg and now Ark. I was just wondering what it is about the apocalypse or the potential of apocalypse that sort of drew you to it and inspired you to make a whole game about it.
So full disclosure, I began writing Arc around 2019. So even then there was already the concept of Doom. So the great 2020 hasn't happened yet. And a part of me wishes it didn't, but what can you do about it? But with Arc, there is a lot of terrible things in the world. And for me personally, as somebody living in a third world country without access to a lot of resources or a lot of movements that could uplift social issues or the advocacies I care about, that can make me and my fellow countrymen really feel powerless. So I think when I was writing Arc, even in 2019, that was kind of my way of giving that power back through roleplay, because the doom is happening and it's going to happen at the end of the clock. But throughout the game, throughout the text, there is never a hint that you can't stop it. At every point, every chapter, even every sentence, there's always that defiant streak that you can rise up and save that this world you care about. And even if the doom happens, it's not a fail state. There is a specific section that tells you something terrible happened, but guess what? You can still deal with it. You can either build a new foundation on top of this new world, or you can decide as a table how to deal with it or rewrite it so that you can still continue being the heroes of this world and saving something that matters to you.
That's definitely something that gets overlooked a lot. I mean, the whole post-apocalyptic genre is about rebuilding, after the apocalypse. There is sort of like an inherent lack of finality in the apocalypse, although we don't feel that when it's looming, right? Because we hate change as a species.
It's true. So this Kickstarter is running through the 30th of June. It is live right now. You've already reached funded. And dear listener, I can tell you that even though a Kickstarter has funded, it is still important to throw your weight behind it, especially when it is a game like Ark, Doom Tabletop RPG, because this is the next thing that is needing to be seen to be believed. It's a fantastic book, and you are going to have a lot of fun playing it. Momatoes, you're doing this with Exalted Funeral, right?
Oh, yeah. They've been incredible partners. So I wasn't actually expecting this to happen. So when it did, it was like, oh, the opportunity of a lifetime. And they have been really helpful along every step of the way, making sure that we actually bring art into physical reality.
That's pretty cool. Well, Momatoes, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Normally, I ask Stu if he has any final thoughts on the subject, but I'm going to ask you today. Do you have any final thoughts on Ark, Doom Tabletop RPG?
For my final thoughts, I just like to express how much appreciation I have for all of the love and support that people have been giving Ark. So people have been giving such strong commendations about it. They've been saying it's a triumph of design. They've been saying they really love the mechanics. And for me, as an indie designer with all of these self-taught skills that I never thought would ever mean anything, it's been overwhelming. I really value and treasure every support that comes our way. And if the listeners would love to check it out, I'd be extremely happy. And if you need any questions answered, if you're very curious, you could always come approach me on social media. I will give you the time of my day.
Very cool. Thanks to Momatoes for coming on the show today. You can still check out Arc Doom Tabletop RPG only on Kickstarter through the 30th of June. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really like the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. You get a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book. You get a behind-the-scenes look at my game, 3-2-1 Action, and the first story coming out soon, Rocket to Russia. You also get access to a killer Discord community that we've got a private room just for our patrons, as well as early release episodes and more. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.